Okay, another framework we talk about, this is really chapter 2, is what leads to winner-take-all or most kinds of market outcomes. And there have been many cases where this has happened. In all of those cases, we see some combination of 4 factors in play. We see strong network effects between the platform and complements, or could be also between the platform and users, same side or cross side. We also see relatively little differentiation or niche strategies that are effective amongst the competitors. Again, you don't want to fragment the market. 3, we see what we call multi-homing as relatively rare. Multi-homing means using more than one platform as your home, as your primary way of doing whatever it is that you're doing. And most people choose either a Mac or a Windows PC or a Google phone or an Apple phone, or they'll do most of their social media connections on Facebook or use LinkedIn for professional. They will not use multiple platforms because there's a high cost to it. And the 4th element is similar to any business. There has to be relatively high barriers to entry, otherwise you're going to have lots of competitors. So you really want to make users and complementers choose. Now, a number of us have been writing about these factors for a number of years. Eisen, Parker, and von Holstein, and a HBR article back in 2006 was really a critical one on the first 3 factors here. So when we see these in play, we see a company like Microsoft end up with 95% of the PC platform market, or Google end up with 80% of the smartphone OS market, or 90% of the global search market, except in countries where they're prohibited. Okay, let's talk a little bit about business models. So on the route to dominating a market, how do you make money? And because you're bringing in multiple sides, there's different opportunities, different ways of making money. You can give away your service for free, for example, to users and charge advertisers. Or you can allow applications developers to build on your platform for free and make money by just selling your platform. There's also more ways to lose money. And so what we've seen, though, many platforms, to get those network effects going, they rely on very large subsidies. And often these come from venture capital. Uber is an example, and I'll talk more about that. Sometimes the network effects are not really strong. They're not strong enough to sustain a dynamic, and so companies jump in with financial subsidies. If there's too much multi-homing, that can also weaken network effects. Some of it is okay. For example, it's very difficult for Amazon to stop anyone from doing online shopping on other websites. However, they encourage you to join Amazon Prime, right, which is a set fee, and then you get free delivery and other services. People don't want to pay twice, so they will first think of shopping with Amazon. So they do a number of things to discourage what we can call multi-homing, even though they're a transaction platform here. Sometimes the scale or scope economies are too modest. Think about Uber. It has to replicate its business essentially in every city or region. For users, we can go to different areas, but the drivers cannot. So the scale economies are actually not as big as Uber would have you believe. And of course, there's going to be competition from conventional firms and other platforms. Platforms have also increasingly encountered constraints that come from the real world. You know, is Airbnb a hotel company, or is it a smartphone app? You know, hotels will argue it's a hotel company, and they need to pay all the taxes and insurance and other things. The same thing with Uber has been arguing it's a technology company, but we know essentially it's in the transport business. So these have been basically, these kind of constraints have been catching up with platforms. There's also been a mood change, and some of the new costs that have come out, feeling that we need, or the platforms themselves need to regulate what they're doing more than they have, and that has led to some extent a drop in ad rates. And in some cases, the platform really needs a winner-take-all or most kind of outcome, like 60, 70, 80% of the market before they can have enough, let's say, market power to end subsidies or raise prices. And again, this is not likely in all markets, and you have to think carefully, and our framework we think is useful to help you think through that, whether it's possible. Okay, so let me bring up a few of the negative sides, and we coined a term called platform mania. Sometimes people think that if you platformize a particular business, you have to make money. You have that potential exponential growth in front of you. And in some ways, it's a winner's curse. And let's think about Uber. They've actually won 70% of the U.S. market, but what have they won? They've won the right to lose billions of dollars a year because of the way they're structured. And we'll talk about that. So the basic point, though, platformizing a bad business may not make it a good business. And for example, ride sharing or grocery shopping via a digital platform does not generate the same types of profits as selling a digital good. And I think users and investors and entrepreneurs have misunderstood this. So again, Uber may encourage a transaction that's digital, but the actual service is extremely physical and very costly to deliver. So you need to separate what Uber does from a company like Google or even Microsoft, okay? So platforms should solve a demand-supply imbalance in a market. It's possible that a digital platform can also allow them to achieve global scale and scope economies that were not otherwise possible, okay? Or introduce other new efficiencies, such as in conducting a transaction using a digital technology. However, if they have to subsidize both sides, at least two sides, then they really haven't solved the chicken or egg problem. And in some of those cases, if basically the platform is just requiring massive subsidies, the bigger the platform gets, the more money it will lose. Okay? And that's what we have seen. Certainly in smaller cases, we see that going on with Uber. Now, we also see it with Chinese bike-sharing platforms where you have 10 companies competing on price and they can't charge enough. And they really haven't figured out a good way to preserve the assets here. Now, which we call these platforms, but they're actually really one-sided platforms. It's like a rental car company. The company owns the assets and then people just share. So it's a bike-sharing platform, but it doesn't really have network effects. And that's one of the reasons these companies have only been able to grow by subsidizing users, essentially charging way below the cost of maintaining those bikes. The same thing with Uber. It has grown through massive subsidies on both sides, paying drivers, and even drivers bitterly complain that they're underpaid, that they're basically working at starvation wages. Nonetheless, Uber pays them pretty large bonuses just to sign up as drivers. Here are these ads in Boston for $2,000, $2,100 guaranteed for their first 300 trips. This is regardless of the fee per ride. And now users, though, also traditionally have been paying maybe half the price of what a taxi cab charges. So in other words, Uber is subsidizing both sides of the market, and that's only been because they have a massive amount of money from SoftBank and other investors there. These investors, it's not quite clear what they've been thinking, but Uber has been losing billions of dollars. They saved a little bit of money when they were preparing for the IPO, but they're on track to lose $3+ billion in 2019. As a matter of fact, they lost over $5 billion in the first quarter of 2019, including IPO costs. But here's one of the problems that Uber encountered, at least in the past. At least as of last year, 12.5% of Uber drivers were quitting each month. And it cost Uber about $650 per new driver acquisition. This is according to a consulting firm that analyzed the pre-IPO data. With 3 million drivers in the past, replacement costs were about 375,000 drivers per month at $650 per driver. That's a total of $250 million a month or $3 billion a year. This is in pure driver replacement costs. And again, it needs drivers, it needs them driving constantly, otherwise the business collapses. And again, there's lots of other alternatives for Uber riders. And so the Uber taxi service is very much like a commodity. And this is very different from Airbnb, which always makes money. It just tries to link people with rooms with people who want to rent rooms. In the Uber case, Uber pays people to keep driving and also pays people to be riding. So Uber subsidizes two sides, Airbnb subsidizes nobody. It just collects a transaction fee.